Coping-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
The McNichols Arena, 16 years later, I'll tell you folks, it should have been a lot of fun. I should have had paradise here. I was the highest paid coach in the National Hockey League. I had great fans. We had a great building. Everything's rolling along. Should have been paradise, eh? Nah, turned into a nightmare. Very first exhibition game we had, the GM said I did a poor job. And folks, it went all downhill from there. Well, I'll tell you, folks, one of my big problems was Hardy Astrom, the Swedish goaltender. I call him the Swedish sieve. His only problem as a goaltender was pucks. Now, I've told you many times about the breakout play that I first got here, our first practice, the breakout plays, you get the pucks at center ice, coach, flip him in on the goalie, he catches them down and out. First two shots, I score. I know I'm in deep trouble. I don't have Jerry Cheevers anymore. I go home that night and I say to Rose, get the bags packed, Rose. We're in trouble again. Yeah, we had a great young defenseman here, all-star. His name was Barry Beck. He wanted more dough, and naturally they wouldn't give him any more dough, so they make a trade with the Rangers. We get a bunch of guys with Mike McEwen. Now, my problems really start now. Mike was one of those guys that the owners, Arthur and Piratori, loved, and Armand Pohan, his stepson, loved. They lived in New Jersey. Got 20 goals there, but he'd stay on for 2 minutes, 3 minutes sometime. I tell him, you stay on 30 seconds and off like the rest of the guys. Needless to say, we're playing Detroit. He coughs up the puck after a 2-minute shift. He comes over here. I get him. I thought I told you to come off. He said, yeah, so what? I grab him by the throat, strangle him like that. I know I'm fired after this. Reporter asked me after the game, Grapes, do you regret choking Mike McEwen? I said, the only thing I regret, I didn't choke him harder. Now, folks, you think they got great fans now? We had great fans back then. I remember one game, 3-0. We beat Pittsburgh. We had 12,005. Worst snowstorm of the year. And as you watch me walk off here, it's the last time I ever coached in the National Hockey
League. Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, let's get this show on the road, shall we? It's your pal, Tim Hanlon. And once again, you have stumbled across Good Seats Still Available. Yeah, it's our weekly little podcast journey into what used to be in professional sports. Thank you for finding us, however you've done so. Thank you for subscribing to us if you've done so. Thank you for sharing this little excursion that we're on each and every week with your friends and your colleagues. We appreciate it. And hopefully we will distract you just a little bit from this week's version of craziness out there in the big bad world. We know how daunting and overbearing all of this has been. It just never seems to end. It's just a different flavor of it each week, it seems. But let us take you away from that for a little while, at least. And regale you with some fun stories from this week's spin of the dial. And we land on the Colorado Rockies. No, not the Major League Baseball team that currently exists and has its own stories to tell for sure. No, we're going to get into the NHL hockey version of said Colorado Rockies. The late 70s, early 80s is when we're going back. And our new pal, Terry Frei, longtime sports columnist and writer and beat reporter, in Denver, the Denver Post in particular, but lots of other places too. And he a prodigious book writer as well in the realm of sports and then some, is our excuse to go back into the 6-year journey of this team that skated through the old McNichols sports arena from 76 through 1982, 6 seasons of, I don't know, I wouldn't call it... I don't know if they were truly woeful, but moribund, maybe a good word. Certainly not boring by any stretch. They made the playoffs one year, barely squeaking in 77-78. being quickly dispatched by the Flyers in the preliminary round back when the Smythe division was perhaps this year's equivalent of the NFC East in in the NFL this year. Nobody seemed to want to make the playoffs, but the Colorado Rockies, a very interesting story. Before they even got to town, certainly while they were in Denver, and still arguably, as we'll get into a conversation with Terry, still, remembered, and we sort of question as to where those memories might legitimately reside. A fun-filled discussion, lots of great memories, certainly a lot of characters, including one Don Cherry, as you heard at the outset there, with his maybe not entirely accurate memories of his 1 year, 79-80. 79-80. Yes, that was the season that Don Cherry was brought in to kind of, rejuvenate the team and maybe allay some fears that never seemed to go away, by the way, of the team potentially leaving Denver and going yet to another location. They themselves, the Rockies, of course, having been a wobbly franchise for 2 years before they even got into town in Kansas City. We've talked about that. The Kansas City Scouts they were, with their old pal Troy Treasure. That's an episode I highly encourage you to go back into our archives and check out. You can find all of our episodes at goodseatsstillavailable.com, of course, or just subscribe to the stream, to the podcast, to the RSS feed, whatever it is, however you get it. You'll find that episode with Troy. That could be a good backgrounder if you want to get that out of your system first before coming back to this one. But I assure you that once they were in Denver, there were just about every season, it seems, were rumored to be on the go again, not to be long for Denver. They lasted 6 seasons. I think many would argue, surprisingly, that they did stick around for that length of period of time because they went through, it seems just as many coaches, almost, I think 3 or maybe 4 owners, if you really sort of go into the lineage. It was never a sure thing for sure. But make no mistake, this team was interesting. They were fun to watch, certainly full of stories. And Terry has brought a bunch of them to us this week. And we reached out to him because we were introduced to one of his many great books. And we'll get into some of the other ones in the back roll of the show. You can see all of them, by the way, at terryfrei.com, TerryFrei, all one word, terryfrei.com. The book that the Rockies memories are embedded in is a great one about a lot of his Denver sports writing exploits. It's called Playing Piano in a Brothel. Now, if that doesn't intrigue you, I don't know what title will. But in there is a great chapter devoted to the story of the Colorado Rockies. And I did not know this until we reached out to Terry for this conversation, that the Colorado Rockies, was the first pro sports beat assignment of his career. Yeah, he was a young Cub reporter in Denver for the Post, I believe it was, if memory serves, part of a competitive 2 newspaper dynamic there in Denver. And the story of the Rockies is almost parallel to that of the young budding sports writer of Terry Frei, and it's a great way to mutually go back in time, the late 70s, early 80s, and remember and sort of marinate a bit about this team and where its legacy, if you can call it that, sort of lives today, and just the fun and interesting times and stories that come out of that. Certainly, Don Cherry's part of that story. We get into, a bunch of different names of the past. Wilf Paymont, for example, legendary, Rocky, if you can call him that. Lanny McDonald, current Hockey Hall of Famer, was part of this story. And even current Panthers coach Joel Quenneville. You Chicago Blackhawks fans, of course, remember him as the 3-time head coach champion of the Chicago Blackhawks, is part of the story, as well as many, many others. We get into just an amazing array, and it's a wonderful excuse to get into the story of the Colorado Rockies, Rocky hockey, shall we call it, in our conversation this week with Terry Frei, coming up in just a few moments' time. You will enjoy it, I guarantee. Let's find a great sponsor this week that marries up with the subject at hand. And I can't think, frankly, of a better one this week than 503 Sports. Yeah, it's our pal Dustin Alameda's fine site and company out in Portland, Oregon. Beautiful Portland, Oregon, for that matter. 503 Sports, 503-sports.com. It's the king of throwbacks, he and they consider themselves, and rightly so. Lots of great stuff, shirts and caps and even handcrafted jerseys made to perfection with lots of great detail. And I call those jerseys out in particular because if you remember the Colorado Rockies, were a fan of said franchise, or want to become because of this episode and our conversation with Terry coming up, you could do worse than to go to 503-sports.com and use, of course, the promo code SEATS for 10% off all of your purchases, in particular, 2 great Colorado Rockies hockey jerseys. These are the authentic handcrafted custom jerseys. You can get your name and number, or any name and number, on the back of them if you'd like. And there are 2 versions of them. There's the blue with yellow and red trim, featuring that memorable Colorado Rockies original logo with a bit of the Colorado flag and the sort of a pattern there of a Rocky Mountain in the background, but also what Dustin calls a remix version of the jersey, where it's in sort of a burnt red that sort of highlights and parallels the C, the letter C in that logo and that Colorado state flag with yellow and blue trim. Both of them are just simply gorgeous. They're made with accuracy from what those old jerseys used to look like. And they're just an amazing, well-crafted way of remembering our topic this week, the Colorado Rockies. Just 1 or 2 of the many great items that you're going to find at 503 Sports. Again, that's 503-sports.com. Again, the king of throwbacks. Make sure that you use the promo code SEATS and enjoy, courtesy of us and Dustin, 10% off all of your purchases when you come early and often at 503 Sports. Again, 503-sports.com, promo code SEATS. Thank you to Dustin for his continued sponsorship of this show. We appreciate it. And we, of course, appreciate you for coming back each and every week to listen to our fun shenanigans. And this week, our conversation with Terry Frei, the longtime and legendary sports writer in and around Denver. And we're going to use his writings and his experiences as our excuse to get into his first beat reporting job. Let's go back and remember the Colorado Rockies. As always, please enjoy.
Well, I was raised in Eugene, Oregon, where my dad was on the football staff at the University of Oregon for 17 years, and he had been a World War II veteran who had played at the University of Wisconsin in 1942, 46, and 47. And in that era, nobody had the sense to actually ask him what he was doing in the 3-year interim there between his sophomore and junior season at Wisconsin. Well, he had been a P-38 fighter pilot in the Pacific, and after playing 2 more years at Wisconsin, he went out to Portland, Oregon, to be a high school football coach, and moved from there down to eventually down to Eugene, where he was on Len Casanova's staff at the University of Oregon for a lot of years, and then became head coach in 1967. So I was raised kind of on the other side of the boundary, looking at the media, covering my father, and being a very protective, very loyal son, and so I had kind of a cynical view of the media. But I had knee problems myself, and one year when I was not playing football at South Eugene High School and was getting ready for baseball, I started writing as a class assignment, started writing for the school paper. And it was kind of an interesting situation because my father had been a much decorated World War II pilot, And I was writing my initial stories on campus unrest at the University of Oregon as kind of my beat. And I covered originally, my first two stories were on the Vietnam veterans against the war. And I had no goal in mind of becoming a journalist, but I wrote those two stories about the Vietnam veterans against the war. The second one was about a hothead former leader of the VVAW who had come to Eugene to make a speech. And I went to the speech and talked to him after the speech, wrote the story. And I don't know whatever happened to that guy. His name was John Kerry.
Wow.
So I'm 16 years old writing a story about John Kerry. And my father's the head football coach at Oregon. And I'm writing these kind of firebrand articles being opposed to the Vietnam War and writing about the VVAW. And my father took some grief for it, but it said, you know, he'd been flying over targets alone, taking pictures in advance of the bombing runs when he was 21 years old. And he was not going to tell me what my political viewpoint could be, but it was also kind of understood that I had the freedom as within certain boundaries to write about and to express my own opinions. And so that's how I got started in journalism. And when my father went to the Denver Broncos, he went from being head coach at Oregon to be offensive line coach of the Denver Broncos with John Ralston. I moved to Denver when I was a junior, in the middle of my junior year of high school. And I was going to Wheat Ridge High School. And I was all excited to move to the big city of Denver until he told me I was going to be a Wheat Ridge farmer. But I came to Denver and played baseball, was a pretty good baseball player. And I saw things like my starting pitcher was Dave Logan, who's now the play-by-play voice of the Denver Broncos, very prominent high school football coach here in Denver. And I walked right into that situation, and I immediately set a state high school baseball record, career high school baseball record that is, I think, still intact to this day. I set a record for most passed balls because Dave was one of the three men who were drafted in all three professional sports and was a proficient pitcher and threw the ball about 95 miles an hour. And I had a little trouble handling him. And so I played baseball at Wheat Ridge, had another knee surgery. And then when I went to the University of Colorado, I worked part-time at the Rocky Mountain News during college. Rocky Mountain News was the tabloid morning paper, similar to the Sun-Times there in Chicago.
Sure.
And worked my way through college that way. Enjoyed the sports writing, and I thought I was not going to get into it as a career, but I was offered a job at the Denver Post right out of college. And my thinking was I was going to save some money, go to law school. Well, I got trapped into being a sports writer. I got shoved into a corner because I was good at it. I enjoyed it, and I was immediately 6 months into my employment was handed the assignment of covering the Colorado Rockies in the National Hockey League. I was a major league beat writer at age 22, very young, very energetic, very naive, very open-eyed, and was thrown into that beat, and that was my first assignment.
Wait,
and,
so, I'm sorry. So, the Rockies were actually your first sort of full-time pro sports beat, then, huh?
Yeah, I had covered high school sports for about 6 to 9 months, and let's be perfectly blunt here. That there was a certain element of the fact that the Rockies had been in Denver for 1 year, and the sports editor covered them that first year, and he didn't want to do it anymore, so he needed somebody on his staff to cover it. And I think he posed the question to the staff in the staff meeting, okay, does anybody in here know the color of the blue line? And I raised my hand, and he said, so, okay, you're covering the Colorado Rockies. That's kind of how I got my start.
Why did he want out of that beat?
Oh, because he needed to be an office administrator, and it was tough to be both sports editor and covering the hockey team.
Well, all right, so what did you – let's just dive right in. What did you walk into, or what did you think you were walking into with this team? And perhaps a little background, because this is, conversations like this aren't necessarily we don't sort of necessarily get specific and granular about historical points and dates and stuff. But there was a bit of a birthing process, I guess, about receiving this team a year prior, right? And
they had played
franchise and the WHA and all that stuff, right?
They had played 2 seasons in Kansas City as the Kansas City Scouts. It was an underfinanced, ineptly financed, bad ownership expansion team in Kansas City, played 2 years there, and literally ran out of money. And the NHL did not do a very good job of vetting ownerships at that time. And so the team moved to Denver, which had kind of a tryout. And hockey was not completely foreign to Denver. That's kind of a myth. There had been many, many years of minor league hockey franchises. The University of Denver is a prominent collegiate program, and a stint in the WHA is the Denver Spurs. And they had moved. There was the thinking that all you had to do was open the door and people would come and see hockey, and that was just not correct. And the Spurs had originally hoped to be an NHL expansion franchise, but then also decided they'd go into the WHA. The ownership was a guy named Ivan Mullinex. And this predates me covering the team. I was in college at the time, but there were rumors that the WHA franchise, the Denver Spurs, were going to move to Ottawa in the middle of the year. And then the ownership and the coaching staff and everything else assured the players that, no, that's not true. We're at least going to finish out the year in Denver. And they went and played a game at Cincinnati. Ralph Backstrom, who won multiple Stanley Cups with the Montreal Canadiens and ended up coaching at the University of Denver, told me the story. They were standing on the blue line for the national anthem, and in Cincinnati, and they had just been told, no, we're not moving to Canada. We're not moving to Canada. Don't worry about it. They're playing in Cincinnati, and the PA system strikes up, "Oh, Canada." And so the players kind of looked at each other and said, well, I guess here in Cincinnati, they know we're moving to Ottawa and we don't. So they ended up moving to Ottawa. That franchise folded. Even the Ottawa Civics folded. And the NHL moved into Denver with that Kansas City Scouts with Jack Vickers, well-known oil man who eventually became kind of the patriarch of the international golf tournament. It was his best-known sporting accomplishment, taking over ownership of the Rockies. And part of the problem was the name of the team was changed to the Rockies. And part of the problem was a certain naivete among ownership that would be a common thread throughout the life of the Colorado Rockies about what they were getting into. I mean, Jack Vickers was told, oh, yeah, the WHA failed, but you get really an NHL team in here, and we'll just sell it out, and it'll be easy. And he'd been sold a bill of goods. And NHL brought in some management people, or shoved in some management people on Jack Vickers that had failed other places but were cronies of league leadership and did not do a very good job of steering that ship. And so the Rockies came in for a 6-year run in Denver after being an ineptly run expansion franchise in Kansas City. And I've always maintained that they would have been better off being an expansion team with a coherent sense of leadership, and you set a course and stick to it. Instead, for the 6-year course of the Rockies, they were starting over, making panic trades, changing ownerships, doing all of that. And so that was that kind of set the table for what happened in those 6 years in Denver.
Yeah. So a couple of things in there. So number one is the bit about expansion, right? Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, Molyneux and the Spurs were kind of hoping that they would originally get, I guess, an expansion franchise or even another relocated team even prior to the Scouts being part of the mix, either from the Golden Seals or even, I think, even the Pittsburgh Penguins at that time.
Yeah,
right?
There was a lot of talk about that. And they originally had been thinking when they built the arena, and part of the problem was there was also, the arena was kind of built for the 1976 Winter Olympics, which were not held because of a vote. It went to a vote of the public, and it was turned down, and had to back out of the commitment to host the 1976 Winter Olympics in the in the mountains and in Denver. And so the arena was kind of built for something that never got held, and it was the right decision. You saw what happened in 1976 at Montreal with the Summer Olympics. They were paying that for years and years and years. And until Peter Ueberroth in Los Angeles hit on the formula of essentially turning the Olympics into a sponsor's haven and raising money that way, you were going to lose money in the Olympics. And the environmental effects would have been disastrous at that time, too. So it was the right decision, and that's why the arena was built. But they didn't have a WHA franchise put into it and ended up with the Rockies and the Nuggets playing in McNichols Sports Arena.
So that's interesting. But then also, McNichols itself seems like it was a hastener, perhaps, of the Spurs and the WHA, just the fact that it was available, it was online, so to speak, and something new, right, versus the Denver Coliseum.
Yeah, it was the generation.
Aging.
It was of the generation of the Riverfront Coliseum in Cincinnati, and Reunion Arena in Dallas, and a lot of other places where they were built really before the private box enterprise.
Spectrum
was part
maybe
of
in Philly a bit too, perhaps the Nassau Coliseum a bit too.
So McNichols, yeah, very much. They all look alike, somewhat alike, and they were a little too far ahead of their time in terms of being built a little too soon, a little before you figured out how you can maximize revenue. So they were out of date from virtually the instant they were opened. In McNichols Arena, you had a hard time getting through the concourse hallways, and it just wasn't a very amenable atmosphere for hockey or basketball or anything else. But it did give them a chance to host the NHL, to host an NHL team.
Well, all right. Give me a sense then. Obviously, you're not covering this until about a year into their life in Denver, but from general recollection in the sports desk in the newsroom, what was sort of the what would you sort of consider sort of the reception of this feudal 2-year Kansas City reject becoming a rebirthed now NHL franchise? Was it just love at first sight in that first year, or like give me a sense of sort of what that relationship was between the sports fans in Denver and this let's call it fledgling NHL club relocating?
Holding it at arm's length with a sense of cynicism about, and you have to understand at the time Denver was kind of an outpost with an inferiority complex. It was before the Denver Broncos went to it was right as the Denver Broncos went to the Super Bowl for the first time in that 1977 season, and there was no Major League Baseball. And so it was still kind of a fledgling sports market with that inferiority complex. Us against the world, which is so tiresome even today, many, many years later, but it was pretty preeminent in the Denver market at the time. And there is no question the hockey team, the NHL team at that time, was far down the hierarchy of importance on the scale there. I mean, I was covering it. I mean, I'm 22 years old. That threw me onto the beat. And it was great training ground. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. Very much enjoyed it. Came to love the sport and covered for many, many years. But at that time, they were kind of holding it at arm's length, and they didn't draw real well. I don't remember what the exact attendance was, but one of the misconceptions is the NHL sold out everywhere all the time. And that simply was not true, as I saw in my travels through the league. But there was a definite attendance problem. Jack Vickers discovered that it was not the gold mine he was told it was going to be. And at one point, I remember, this is getting a little ahead of the story. I remember when the ownership decided they had to raise the price of the best seat in the house. And it was no longer viable or feasible to continue to charge these ticket prices. So they raised the top ticket price to $14. That was the top ticket price. And you would have thought that there had been a revolution in the empire or something, having to go all the way up to $14 for an NHL hockey ticket. And so it was held at arm's length. There was a lot of kind of hopeful atmosphere about if they could just do it right, if they could actually be patient instead of making panic deals all the time, that this may be a way to get Denver into the sports spotlight with hockey as a primary arm of it, but it didn't happen. There were many, many entertaining moments over the years we can get into, but I will say that it never quite, there were moments of false starts, moments of promise, moments of being hopeful about it digging in, but it never happened.
Well, given that shaky start, I'm guessing. So, why the price raise then? My understanding is, I guess.
Oh, I think it was later. That was later when the territorial ownership.
But they also had a pretty
poor, on their.
But they also had a pretty poor lease, though, at McNichols, right? So that maybe wasn't necessarily unexpected.
Yeah. What happened was in the second season, 1977-78, it was Vickers' second year of ownership. He complained about the lease on McNichols Arena and said, we're not drawing, we're having trouble gaining ground here. We need some help from the city. Our lease is terrible. And the problem was the Rockies made the playoffs in 1978. 12 of the 17 NHL teams did make the playoffs, and they played the Flyers in a 2 out of 3 first round. And there was a little bit of feeling of, hey, that we're getting there. I remember Bobby Clark saying, hey, this is a pretty good young team. They need to be patient here in Denver. It's going to work. But Zach Vickers went on television between periods of the home playoff game and said, if we don't get a better lease, we're going to have to leave, or I'm going to have to sell. And so it really shot all the momentum of the team actually making the playoffs. They were 19, 40, and 21 and made the playoffs.
Yeah, we had to put quick parenthetical. We have to put that in perspective, right? This was they squeaked by. It's only because each division got to the top 2 teams, and then the Smythe division that year was mediocre, I guess at best. But it's still a glint of hope that obviously didn't go much further than that.
Yeah, I still call the NFL East this year, the NFC East this year, the Smythe Division, which gives you an idea
good analogy.
How good the Smythe Division is. And so it was a terrible division, and the Rockies sneaked in the playoffs, played pretty well, put a scare into the Flyers, but Vickers took all air out of the momentum that was being built. And I actually did, and he challenged me, and this is one of the better jobs. And I will say I was very, very young, not a hockey expert, still finding my way along, but I was a dogged reporter. I was really, really dogged reporter. And I did a survey of all the leases in the NHL. And the problem is, as I'm sure you can understand, Tim, there were apples and oranges when you try to compare leases. And I pretty much concluded in a huge, huge, huge story that they had a case for not being treated fairly on the lease, but it wasn't really the dagger to completely block the potential of the franchise for getting over the hump in Denver. But Vickers ended up selling the team to Arthur Imperator instead of putting his head down and trying to fight through that lease and move on from there.
Now, how about the relationship in that building with the Nuggets? Right, the Nuggets obviously had a bit of a longer history from the ABA, right? And the 76, mm-hmm. the dawn of the slam dunk contest and all that stuff, All-Star game. What was how influential were the Nuggets in this situation, if at all? And I'm guessing there wasn't necessarily a great spirit of cooperation back. Actually, there was a pretty convivial atmosphere between the teams in the arena because. Well, for one thing, the Nuggets were run by Carl Shearer, who was really a showman and understood that kind of element of the business of being a basketball man. And they were a very entertaining team to be around. The Nuggets had a keg in their conference room that they would open at 5:00, and the media would come in, and it'd be like a media cocktail hour, and with officials of the team, and the Rockies people would come in too. And it was actually pretty convivial. Almost friendly relationship between the two teams and the media, the overlap of the people who covered them and who were around them. And I do know at one point, the Nuggets were very, very, very scared of the potential for the hockey franchise. At that time, there was a question whether there was enough money in Denver and enough wherewithal in Denver to support both NHL and NBA. Remember, it wasn't completely common at that time for cities the size of Denver to have both NHL and NBA, and the Nuggets were kind of scared of the Rockies in that sense. If they ever got going, they may be a competition for season ticket revenue and other kinds of revenue, corporate revenue. And so, but the relationship was actually pretty good. And at one time, now eventually, after the Imperator sold the franchise to Peter Gilbert, the Buffalo cable entrepreneur and millionaire former cable entrepreneur, he considered actually buying the Nuggets and having both teams, but that was way ahead of its time, and he didn't do it. But those were the major possibilities. The Nuggets really didn't view the Rockies as serious competitors, but they were afraid of what they might become. Interesting. Give me a sense of what was going through your head. This is a pretty big assignment, if you will. This is, one of the big 4 pro sports leagues. You're basically full-timing this now on the second season of this team. Were you intimidated? Were you The looseness of the situation and or the arm's length relationship, I guess, of the fans with the team, did that kind of make it a little less spotlighty and a little easier maybe to kind of focus on the job at hand without worrying about pressure or any of that kind of stuff? What was going on?
Actually, I have espoused that viewpoint many times in my career, that one of the reasons it was a great proving ground for me was that it was not the most prominent beat on the paper. The Broncos were, of course, and even college football probably was considered ahead of the Rockies at that time, and I was allowed to kind of find my own way on the beat. And in those early days, the Denver Post was an afternoon newspaper, and so you really weren't under the gun except on Saturday night for deadline purposes. And so I was really I was allowed to kind of stumble along, find my own way, and the issue was I was both being indoctrinated into the daily newspaper business and being indoctrinated in the business of covering a major league team full time at the same time. And so that was rather daunting. But I wasn't intimidated by it. And frankly, I found my niche doing it. But I was allowed to kind of find my own way, set my own course, and do it that way. And I really got eye-opening travel. And remember, I was a kid who'd grown up as a coach's son. My dad was in the NFL for the rest of his career at that point. And my dad ended up going from Denver to Chicago there in Lake Forest. My family lived in Lake Bluff for a while, and to Tampa Bay and back to Denver with Dan Reeves. So the only awkward parts of my reign as a Denver newspaper reporter is my own dad would have to tell me off the record. But I was finding my way on the daily newspaper beat at the time, covering the Colorado Rockies.
Well, I guess the other side of that, though, would be trying to fight for space, right, to get your stories in, and not be the last thing in there, right? Because I'm sure you're some great stories and some great things sort of percolating there. The NHL beat generally, but the team specifically. And were there any sort of, did you find yourself having to defend yourself or fight with the deputy editor or the sports guy to kind of get more lineage for yourself?
Oh, editors and I always got along real well. I said that tongue in cheek.
I'm a former journalist, so I think I could discern some of that sarcasm coming through.
Okay. I actually have been asked that question a lot about kind of and we even discussed here a little bit about the Rockies hierarchy, but I have to say, thinking back and even thinking at the time, that it was never a problem for lack of space or lack of play or being told to cool my jets or don't be writing this or don't be writing that, or we don't have space for this, we don't have space for that. For the most part, in the era of that, there was a Denver newspaper war going on, and anything you could do to make your paper kind of step ahead of the competition, the Rocky Mountain News, and to carve out a niche that way was welcomed. And so I have to say, there had been some discussion. I've heard it over the years of one of the problems with the Rockies was they didn't get the massive coverage. I have to kind of, both out of a sense of self-defense, but also out of a defense of the newspaper industry at that time, both papers covered the Rockies extremely well, especially considering their lack of success over the years. And I don't even think that entered into it. And in the perspective of many years later, looking back, it may be tempting to draw that inference and draw that conclusion that they didn't get the coverage that a major league team deserved. And I have to say, no, that's just not true. That they did, that was not part of the problem. And part of it was we had a lot of space, we had a lot of resources in those years, and it really wasn't a matter of deciding whether to travel on the trip to Montreal or Toronto. You went, and so it really wasn't a problem.
Yeah, you young whippersnappers out there don't recognize that, the late 70s, early 80s. I wouldn't call it the heyday necessarily of newspaper and sports writing and journalism and whatnot. I think there are many years of where that is. But, it seems like an ancient sort of artifact, right, to even talk about, well, maybe a newspaper, let alone having two major dailies in a metropolitan area fighting it out. I want to say halcyon days, but yes, resources. I think that's the better word, right? You're traveling with the team. You're going around other locations around the league. You're covering this team full time and then some, and writing, expansive stories on a regular basis. That's almost just short of a luxury these days, it seems.
Well, I don't want to get too wistful on people, but when I worked at the Rocky Mountain News in college, it was at the very end of the hot type days. Do you remember hot type? Silver trays of type.
Yes,
and
I heard of it, but I just remember doing galleys in the school newspaper, right?
Okay.
So that's at least something.
And when I walked into the Denver Post, I can remember the very first picture. I had worked for 3 years at the Rocky Mountain News in college, so I wasn't completely naive. When I walked into the newsroom at the Denver Post full time, 4 days after graduating from college, first sight I saw was a veteran reporter, Frank Haraway, wearing one of those visors. Remember those visors, kind of plastic visors?
Sure, kid.
And typing on a typewriter with carbon paper, and smoke throughout the room. And it changed very quickly. We entered the computer age right after that. But I'm very, very happy that I got a taste of those kind of front page allusion to movie that nobody listening gets. Remember Walter Matthau? Well, whatever. I was exposed to that front page era, and I was very, very proud to be a part of it in the transition to the computer age. But the actual mechanics of covering the hockey team and traveling with major league teams at the time was different. You traveled with the team. The team had the plane tickets, handed you your plane ticket, and you always sat in the smoking section. I remember that. And traveled with the team, rode the bus to the hotel, and they billed the team for all of it. So you were not ethically compromised at all. But you traveled with the team. And the one thing I can tell young reporters now that they really miss out on is getting to know the players, getting to be around everybody. I have friends from that era to this day, from actually having traveled with the team and been a part of it. And you're not a part of the team, but you're on the periphery, and it's enjoyable. And I really enjoyed it when I did it with the Nuggets after the Rockies left. I was switched to the Nuggets beat, and very much enjoyed that too. And but you wrote on. I was on a PM cycle for much of it, meaning I could file the next morning. I was traveling with the team, and it was just a very, very enjoyable experience, and one that I still treasure to this day.
Yeah, our pal John Sterling, who was on this show a year plus ago, Yankee broadcaster, great, and ABA guy and WHA guy and stuff. He sort of recounted, some of his Nets days, for example. I mean, he almost felt like an extended member of the team, which I think kind of, if I remember conversation correctly, kind of cut both ways. I mean, there's a bit of a familial feel, right? I mean, you get to know the players, and you're kind of a sort of part of the mix. But I got to think, though, on some level, that could also make perhaps some uncomfortableness, maybe not as a play-by-play broadcaster as much as a reporter, when, say, something a little, I don't know, harder to kind of write or convey or whatever pops up versus a feature piece.
Yeah, there was that sense of every once in a while somebody would look at you and you say, "Did you really say that about me?" And yeah, you'd feel guilty but for the most part, honestly, my experience has been, and I'm sure you've heard this from many people, is that was less of an issue in hockey than any other sport. That they got it, they understood that in hockey people could be as critical of themselves as anybody else. So I don't think it was as bad as like when I covered basketball or as I've heard covering baseball, where the pressure to be part of the team is more preeminent.
All right. How about some of the players that sort of come to mind, some of the characters that were part of all this? We'll get into Don Cherry in a minute, but any particular players or names, either people, well remembered, like a Wilf Paymont or a Chico Resch, perhaps, or maybe even not so, just folks that immediately pop to mind. Now, we're only talking about a 6-year period of time, and you were only covering a portion of it. But any names or people or personalities that just pop to mind that are hard to forget, for better or for worse?
Wilf Paymont was their original star. He came from the Kansas City franchise, came with Kansas City franchise to Denver, was their first star. And his father wrestled bears in carnivals, and Wilf was cut from the same cloth, and was involved in a very, very controversial issue when he high-sticked Dennis Plonich to the face, was suspended, ended up having to reach a settlement out of court for it. And I remember having to cover that. It was a very, very splashy incident. one that would be different today because there was no video. Can you imagine something happening in a hockey game that warranted suspension and all of that, yet there was no video of it? Can you think that could happen today? But it did. Nobody could see it. It was everybody taking each other's word for what happened behind the play. It was behind the play. But Wolf Paymont was the original best player for the Colorado Rockies, but he ended up being traded. And then the next player that I remember was Barry Beck, who in my mind would have been one of the prime great defensemen in the game had he not been injured after he was sent to the sent to the Rangers in the major 6-player trade early in the Don Cherry era. He was going to be a terrific defenseman and was terrific in his days with the Rockies. But they realized that they needed some bodies to actually score some goals. And so Cherry acquiesced and even pushed forward the trade of Barry Beck to the Rangers. Those are the original 2 players that stood out to me. And then Wolf Paymont was traded, though, to Toronto for Lanny McDonald. And Lanny McDonald, and this is the way hockey worked in those days, was rocking the boat in Toronto, and he was not getting along with owner Harold Ballard, who was an irascible sort who would answer his own phone in the offices and be drunk when he answered the phone. And even a young beat writer from Denver, Colorado could call him and talk hockey with him. And he ended up trading Lanny McDonald because he was rocking the boat, wanted more money, was not enjoying himself in Toronto, did not like Harold Ballard. And so Harold Ballard's idea was to trade him to Siberia. He was going to get him to the worst situation in hockey. So they traded him to the Colorado Rockies for Wolf Paymont. And the throw-in in that trade, I don't know if you know what happened to this guy. The throw-in, because Lanny McDonald came from Toronto to the Colorado Rockies with,
Don't know.
Joel Quenneville.
I was just going to I was actually going to guess Joel Quenneville, who, to be honest with you, is probably where I was going to go with that was that Lanny McDonald 10 years later, or 82 or 92, the only member, I guess, of the Rockies to be inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. As a coach, you wonder if Quenneville is going to actually be in the Hall of Fame too and join him, right?
Yeah, so he joked with all the players that shut up that Terry actually covered me when I was a kid and remembers that Lanny McDonald was a throw-in in that trade when I came to the Rockies. He joked about that, of course. And that was the one. And the other thing, as they went through the ups and downs, and I still remember, and I think this was kind of the death knell of the franchise. I think, the Barry Beck trade had so many offshoots, it was impossible to track years later. You know how those kind of trades work out, where if you try to work all the offshoots, you end up so far off track, it's impossible to actually track what happened. So it's hard to say that the Lanny McDonald and Barry Beck trades were bad because they involved each other, for example. But I also remember when later in the stay of the Rockies, when they traded Lanny McDonald to Calgary, and I don't know if you've heard the story, that I was on the trip, and when Lanny McDonald was told in the Winnipeg airport that he had been traded, and he actually was broken up. Like Barry Beck, he cried. He really liked playing for the Rockies. He and his wife loved living in Denver, and he went onto the bus at the Winnipeg airport, and I'm going to wait with him and ride to the Winnipeg arena to get his equipment and do an interview. And so I'm waiting for him. He was on the bus, and he was very tearful and talking to the players on the bus. And one of his teammates, Rob Ramage, defenseman Rob Ramage, who was one of the baby bulls from the WHA who transferred, who was drafted into the NHL after the merger. So Lanny said, "Lanny, shut up. This is going to be the best thing that ever happened to you." And it actually was. He ended up, of course, winning the Stanley Cup in Calgary and being a superstar there, Hall of Fame player. But that was that's the other trade I remember. One for Lanny McDonald and one sending Lanny McDonald to Calgary. And that was part of the fits and spurts and false starts and screw-ups that made Rocky hockey, really Rocky hockey.
All right, what's this? NordVPN. Fantastic. Friends, the world of the internet gets crazier and less secure by the day, it seems. And privacy is a huge issue. when you're traveling, perhaps even using Wi-Fi, right? You never quite really feel comfortable in knowing that, your internet connection is secure, that you're not being tracked, that your data, frankly, is not being accessed and unwittingly pilfered and used for other purposes that you don't want it to be used for. And that's where virtual private networks, he says, comes in very handy. And the best out there of late is our friends at NordVPN. That's Nord VPN. Let's say you want to, you're traveling and you want to access a streaming service when you're in another country. This is a great way, a virtual private network, to access those services without sort of being bumped out because your computer device thinks that you're living in another country. If you use Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi at that, on a regular basis, you know how dicey that proposition can be. It's convenient, sure, but when you're sitting in a lobby of a hotel or a Starbucks, you think it's secure, but are you really sure? Encrypting your data, very important when you're sending an important file, let's say a tax form to your accountant. And file sharing, you've got a project that you're trying to share with your team. Even in a Slack environment or whatever, those things can get easily sidetracked and or intercepted without the benefits of a virtual private network. And again, NordVPN is the best that I found out there. And I can't tell you how not only important a VPN is, but how probably the best that I've seen to date is our friends at NordVPN. And of course, I wouldn't be telling you about all this unless we had a special offer for it. Of course we do. It's a special holiday deal for every purchase of a 2-year plan, and it's relatively well priced. I think you'll find it itself a good deal. You'll get 4 additional months for free when you go to nordvpn.com/good seats. That's Nord, N-O-R-D, V as in Victor, PN.com, nordvpn.com/good seats. And don't forget to use the coupon code good seats at checkout. And again, you're going to get 4 additional months for free when you purchase a 2-year plan. NordVPN, it's the best that I found out there in the worlds of virtual private networks. Check them out, NordVPN. Thank you for your support of the show. And now back to said show. Well, besides, obviously the team really was fair to Midland, right? And that's being generous, frankly, if you look at the across the 6 years. But
they were always competitive.
Yeah, I was going to say, were they fun to watch?
They were. Yeah, they weren't so rotten that you can waste a lot of disdain on them. They were very competitive. They were good guys, and they always showed up. And it was just one of those things where they just weren't good enough.
All right, well, then explain to me, and maybe this sort of kind of sets us sort of the denouement eventually. I get the sense that even in the first couple of years, their long-term, rooting in Denver was not guaranteed. Because I think it looks like as early as 78, like that second season.
Oh, they were tops, yeah.
Yeah, so give me a little sense of that, because the management musical chairs was somewhat always looming, it seemed, and it never really seemed like they were going to, it was a foregone conclusion they were going to stick around.
Well, the other reason they said it was a great training ground for me because of the news element. I mentioned the major lease survey story that I did, but there was always something like that. I mean, there was some talk when they were going to sell the team. Is the statute of limitations run out? Can I get you sued, or is it okay?
I think you'll be just fine, and I'll take the chance.
Okay. Well, there was a guy in St. Louis who was in the reinsurance business, and he claimed he was going to be the savior of the Rockies. And I got a tip about he was going to buy the Rockies. He was going to be the savior of them. And no, I'm not going to say his name. I'll keep it out of it.
Oh, come on. Breaking news for a story from 40 years ago? Come on. Go for it.
That's okay. Well, there's this big celebration because Robert Hutchings is going to buy the team. I said his name once, okay? And everybody's talking about it. And I get a call from somebody, and I know who it is. I knew who it was later. I get a call. One of those great anonymous tips in those ages. They didn't get texted to you. They could actually pick up a phone and call you and tell you something. Said, hey, you really need to check this guy out. And so I checked it out, and we ended up running a picture of checks that had bounced, and questioning the actual wherewithal of them being able to own a franchise in the National Hockey League. And so the sale kind of got scuttled because they figured out, we can't go through this again. We can't have somebody in the ownership who's really not financially capable of owning and running a franchise. And so there was always something like that. There were always rumors of people buying franchise, whether Canadian furniture entrepreneur who was actually very bona fide, but ended up just not buying the team. There was always the rumors that somebody was going to buy the team, and they ended up with somebody. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, about 4 owners, and making it through that way until the team was moved to New Jersey. But there was always. Yeah, why was stories?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So why was Vickers so quick in like almost 2 years, just quickly 2 years, already looking either to move or to sell, and then Imperatori coming into the mix? I mean,
bluntly, what happened was, in my opinion, what happened with Jack Vickers, who was a respected man in the Colorado market, he realized he'd been completely sold a bill of goods by the National Hockey League and the league management and other people involved in the league, and realized, hey, this is going to be a real long haul to get this going. And he was very, very wealthy, but he was not of the ilk that we picture now as being deep-pocketed owners. And so I think he was just a little betrayed, because he had been told by people in Colorado, for example, that, boy, you just turn on the beer taps and you're going to make money. And that was kind of the attitude of the National Hockey League at the time, too. To backtrack a little bit, when I took over the NHL beat, we had a columnist named Steve Cameron, who had been in the National Hockey League working for a team very briefly, and then got back into the newspaper business. He says, Terry, you're going to find one thing out about the NHL. These are people who love to wear tuxedos to league functions and throw up on them by the end of the night. And that's the NHL of that era. And that was the NHL I was covering. That was the NHL that Jack Vickers got into and found he just wasn't a good fit.
So when he sold to Arthur Imperatori, right, it was a Jersey guy.
Yeah.
Was it implied or explicit or somewhere in between that New Jersey was a legitimate place for this team to ultimately move because of it and him?
Well, I think you've read what I wrote about it, and a lot of people have read what I've written about it, both in my book, Playing Piano in a Brothel, and on my website and everywhere else, and said, no, yeah, it really couldn't have been that way. I said, no, it was. Arthur Imperatori was a Ranger season ticket holder who was involved in several, mainly the trucking business in New Jersey, but several other entrepreneurial ventures. And the stepson was a brilliant man who was involved in his ventures too. And they were hockey fans, literally hockey fans. I mean, they just decided they wanted to own a hockey team and bring it to New Jersey. And Jack Vickers and other people led him to believe that the NHL knew that they had given up on the Denver market, and he wouldn't have any trouble getting the team to New Jersey. At the time, the problem was there was just on the drawing board the Meadowlands Arena and the Meadowlands project, and that it wasn't immediate to be able to move it New Jersey anyway. And so, but Imperatori bought the team thinking that he would eventually be able to move it to New Jersey, and he could just play in Denver or on an interim basis, perhaps being a second tenant at Madison Square Garden. Everybody forgets the New York Americans and the Rangers shared Madison Square Garden at one time. And
sure.
He thought maybe they could do that.
So by the way, the WHA Raiders did too for a cup of coffee.
Yeah. So they thought they could maybe do that again, but they were told, no, that can't work. And he actually stood in the mayor's office at the news conference saying, I'm going to own this team for a while and move to New Jersey. And it was a little more complicated than that. It would take too long to tell that story. But I remember standing, and I've said this, I'm a short guy, I'm 5'8". I stood on a chair to get his attention, and I said, do you really think people are going to support this team on a lame duck basis like that? And he kind of looked, and by the way, I later found out Arthur Imperatori was a very, very nice man. I think he had to be ruthless in business in certain elements, but on a personal level, he was a very, very nice man, and I came to greatly respect him and even kept in touch with him over the years. But he was honestly taken aback by the question. And he was so taken aback, I realized he couldn't be faking it. He was absolutely genuine. It was like I was being, completely unfair, and he hadn't even thought of it that way. Well, so they buy the team, and they find out, hey, we're not going to be able to move to New Jersey. That's way down the road anyway, because they're building before they can get that arena built. It's not going to be feasible to move to New York on a piecemeal or on a co-tenant basis. And so they said, well, I guess we better try to make this go, because otherwise it's just complete financial disaster. So, and when I say this, people find it hard to believe. I've said a lot of things I've said noted here where people find it hard to believe, but that was Rocky hockey. But they really did try to make a go of it in Denver, because it would have been a financial disaster to do otherwise. And they gained my respect because they tried. But one of the things they tried was hiring Don Cherry, and they tried a lot of things. And we'll get to the end of the story later.
All right. Well, let's get to Cherry in a second. But so I'm trying to get to the bottom of the Imperatore kind of thing. Did he naively buy this franchise thinking that New Jersey could be an exit strategy for him, or?
Yes. No, not could. It was. He really believed that would happen. He didn't even have any doubt about it. And originally, when he bought the team, he thought he was going to end up owning it in New Jersey.
Interesting. And how about the NHL in the background? Were they kind of, I don't want to call them co-conspirators, but were they kind of winking and nodding that could be a path for him too?
No, because the NHL very much coveted New Jersey as an expansion market, and so they told Arthur Imperatore after the fact that no, you're wrong. I mean that's not going to work. I think there's certain things we can forget with the passage of time, but at the time there really was thinking that the Meadowlands market with the stadium and the racetrack and the arena that would be built was going to be one of the hotbeds in all of Major League and professional sports, and that you couldn't miss with a hockey team there. And there was the feeling that it was a very, 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 very it would be a very rewarding expansion market, and the NHL wanted to preserve it as that. So they made it clear very quickly after the sale was announced, and hey, if you think you're moving the Rockies to New Jersey, you're wrong, because we're going to sell it as an expansion market. And we were told, of course, and this is getting ahead of the story too, but we were told later that that Meadowlands Arena, which turned out to be Brandon Byrne Arena, would never have an empty seat or an unsold ticket for a hockey game ever. That it would be the hottest market in the NHL.
That's very interesting. Now, having grown up in the area at that time and being a big soccer fan at the time, I went to more than my fair share of Devils games. But to see, for example, two indoor soccer teams, the New Jersey Rockets of the MISL and the Cosmos of the outdoor, and in it, both of them around 81, 82, basically going on that same logic and largely killing each other and the sport and its success. Yeah, you don't want to call it a white elephant per se, because the Nets had long deserved their own place to call their own after having their own peripatetic life in and around the New Jersey, New York metropolitan area. But yeah, I think there was absolutely a heady belief that this was going to be the Mecca in the marsh out there in Meadowlands. And it really, the indoor arena at least, didn't really turn out that way at all.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I know that a lot of people are probably saying, well, he's screwing up the story because they ended up going to New Jersey anyway. But that was not the plan at the time. That ended up through rather complicated machinations later. But the Imperator wanted to get them to New Jersey, and it just was not going to happen.
Okay, so we'll get to that in 1 second. But before we do that, let's indeed talk about Don Cherry, because it seems like this was sort of the maybe the pièce de résistance, I guess, or the last sort of shot, I guess, to make this work in Denver. If I'm going to have to stick around, maybe a little quickie on Don Cherry, his reputation. I think most people today recognize him as the bombastic and often controversial, and maybe former, I think, if I'm not mistaken, hockey commentator for CBC. But he was a coach at the time, and one of pretty decent pedigree with Boston prior. What was it about Don Cherry that was all the thing to bring him into town, and why he was sort of going to be the answer, I guess, for this franchise to make him stand out in the market?
He had been in Boston, I think, for 5 years, and they flamboyant, had the media eating out of his hand for much of the time, and was successful. And but the 5th year, he has constant fights with management, constant fights with Harry Sinden, constant fights with everybody involved, became a little grating, and he essentially was fired after his 5th year. There was a much noted too many men on the ice penalty in a playoff series. I think it was with Montreal. That was much cited in his exit, but I think that was mostly that there was a marriage that had turned sour, and so Don Cherry was hired by the Colorado Rockies, and it was a much heralded, much discussed, much trumpeted hire that he was probably the most famous coach in hockey at the time, and he really was relishing the challenge of coming into Denver and being kind of the guy that could put hockey over the top, and it was an ego thing for him, but he was making $180,000, I think. I'm looking at the 1978 media guide, and to give you an idea, the Rockies have 20 pictures on the front of the 1979-80 media guide, little thumbnail sketch pictures of all 20 of them are of Don Cherry, and on the back is Don Cherry with his beloved blue football. And so he was going to be the selling point. And what they didn't realize was the coach doesn't sell tickets in hockey. Really, not really. I mean, but he did have the mediating it out of his hand in his year here. And he came in and immediately was at cross purposes with general manager Ray Miron and ownership. And because they didn't give him everything he wanted, he was terrific to cover as a beat writer, though. I mean, you always got material from him. You could walk in there after the game not knowing you're going to write about, and walk out having yards of material from what he had said about, well, the suit he was wearing, or talking about how bad the Rockies goaltending was. He was the one coach who would tell you how bad somebody was, and I covered a game in Hartford with him, and I still remember this to this day. Going on with some new television network between periods. There were 2 of us there from the media, and they needed 2 guests between periods. And we said, well, what do you get? And one thing was the transistor radio. And if you went on the Whalers radio broadcast, if you went on with this new TV network called ESPN, you got to thank you very much and good luck on the rest of the year. So I ended up doing the ESPN shot with it was George Grand between periods, and that night they were so bad. John Cherry said our goaltending was horse bleep, and he used the word for bleep. And I've tried everybody in there but the guy in the confectionery store. So we heard from all these guys who work in confectionery stores saying, give him a shot as being a goaltender for the Rockies. And the whole year was like that. Just stuff like when they went into Boston. And I've only covered one game in my entire career where I've wondered later whether the fix was in. And the Rockies were terrible. They were coached by Don Cherry. They went into Boston, and the Bruins were still good, coached by Fred Creighton. And in the last minute, the Rockies were ahead. I think it was 4-2. Gilles Gilbert goes to the bench, and they call a timeout. I can't remember who called the timeout. But Don Cherry used the entire timeout to sign autographs for the fans around the Bruins bench. It was one of the funniest things I've ever seen in sports. Maybe you had to have been there. But that was the way the year went. It was just a lot of fun. He was a lot of fun to cover. And, you know, his acerbic manner has become funny in later years. But at that time, he wasn't a very complicated coach. I mean, the Douglas Chase style was stultifying in some ways, but he got them a lot of attention, but he ended up only lasting 1 year.
That Rockies yearbook that you're mentioning is available for a good $36 now on eBay. So it's got some value to it, and the pictures of him are you could see the how good copy he would be. Come to the fights and watch.
He would. I have to tell you one thing. He would call me at home. He would call me at home. He knew the deadlines. He would call me at home and say, "I thought of something better to say than I said after practice." That's never happened to me as a beat writer again.
That's gold. right? You gotta lock onto that and not let go, right? When you're a beat writer like that, come for the fight. Come for the fights and watch a Rockies game break out. Was he behind that, or was that just something that somehow stuck around that time, or am I just?
Well, part of it was, I don't know if you remember this. Couple of things happened that year. Number one was the famous stick fight between Bobby Schmutz and Paul Stewart, who later became, ironically, an NHL referee, where they high-sticked each other, drew penalties and game misconducts, and ended up getting in a stick fight in the hallway during the game. And everybody figured out what was going on, and the benches in McNichols were across from the gate, so you had to skate across the ice to get to the door to go to the locker room, and everybody raced off the ice during the game because they figured out that Paul Stewart and Bobby Schmutz are going to be in a stick fight. And I still have a picture of that fight going on in the hallway with Lanny McDonald standing there hoping to break it up. And the irony of Paul Stewart becoming an NHL referee was just too much in some instances. That would happen. Billy Smith scored a goal for the Islanders that season because Rob Ramage fired it into the empty net. It was the very first goal for an NHL player, NHL goaltender, and I was a PM paper at the time. And I called Billy Smith in his hotel room, and I think you know enough about Billy Smith to know that he might have had like a beer or two after the game before I got him. Well, okay. He was.
No, yeah, sure.
And he said, in 40 years, I'm going to be telling my grandkids that I was a wicked wrister, wicked wrister from Mandan or something like that. And it was Rob Ramage putting the puck in the own net. And they also played that year. They also played at Atlanta against the Flames with Jim Craig in goal in his first game for the NHL franchise in Atlanta, and he was going to hopefully be the guy who saved the franchise for Atlanta too. And the Rockies, I think, got I'm going to make this up, I don't remember. They probably had about 11 shots, and the first one was like 2 minutes left in the first period. So they didn't even make Jim Craig break up a sweat as he was draping the American flag after the game and doing media. And so, Don Cherry was part of all that. And it was a very, very, I have to admit, it was a very, very entertaining year, although they were terrible.
Well, he certainly didn't quit, right? He was canned, right, at the end of the season?
Yeah, and it took about, I want to say a month for the dust to settle. And they were basically, what the deal was, they were kind of waiting for Cherry to kind of say, I really want to stay, let's try to make this a better marriage, and I'll stop fighting you on everything, and let's get a coherent plan and try to get better. And I think they just realized that it just wasn't going to work. So he was fired after about a month in the off season. And it was more of he wanted to stay, but it didn't break his heart because he understood that it wasn't a very good marriage. And, it was funny because the thought was, we've seen coaches do this. Not everybody is like Bill Cowher. But who got out and stayed out. The thinking was that Don Cherry was going to do some broadcasting. He did some broadcasting in the playoffs that year, and then ended up starting the next season in broadcasting. And the thought, for the most part, was going to be that he was going to get back into coaching, but he never did. He really found his niche in the coach's corner aspect of the Hockey Night in Canada broadcast, and so getting fired by the Rockies was probably a good thing for him.
Yeah, I think if there's some video floating around of him sort of reminiscing about, I think, his last game, or what he thought was going to be his last game, I guess was in a snowstorm in Denver. It was like 20,000 people there, which is a larger crowd than normal. And they won the game, and it almost like he went out sort of on like a swan song almost.
Well, I think the other thing that happened there is that's one of those stories that gets better every time you hear it. I think now, the last time I heard, there were 416,000 people at that game.
There you go.
It was a snowstorm. It was a decent crowd, but it wasn't huge. It wasn't as big as kind of the story became in retrospect. But there's no question he was popular. He's very popular. They didn't like they drew 9,700 per game that year. I'm looking this up real quick, and I'm trying to remember the last game. It was against Calgary, and Chico Resch went off the ice crying. I remember that because he really liked it here too. The crowd that night was 11,610. So it was not a full house, but it was, and they were chanting Cherry at the end. He was very popular, but they needed to get good to sell tickets, and that was going to be a long road to hoe.
All right. Well, let's round the corner then and sort of talk about sort of the end of it. Now, were you still beat writing for this team exclusively, or were you kind of on to other things at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, by then I'm in my mid-20s and just converging on the late 20s. And I was writing other things too in the off season. It was not a completely year-round assignment, but when the Rockies, they had been sold from Imperator to Peter Gilbert, and Peter Gilbert was the mind of trying to get him to New Jersey too. So that last year there were just rumors and rumors and rumors of sales, and I was writing all these stories all the time from league meetings and everything else about it. And eventually what happened was Gilbert ended up selling to John McMullen, and John McMullen paid what amounted to expansion-type fees, territorial indemnity to the Rangers, Islanders, Flyers. I don't remember the Capitals were involved too. So they sort of maintained it as an expansion market without making an expansion team. And so it's kind of the best of both worlds for the NHL. And I came back from the meeting at which they were pronounced having been sold and moved to New Jersey, and then to the news conference there where we were told they would never have an unsold ticket at the Meadowlands Arena, be the greatest market for hockey ever. I don't know what happened there. And I returned to Denver, took a phone call that night, and was told to get my butt to San Diego for the NBA meetings because I was now covering the Denver Nuggets. And so I switched from hockey to the NBA, had a very enjoyable time covering the NBA after that.
Well, that's not a bad upgrade. Give me a sense though, why Gilbert only owned the team for a year? What was that? Was he just like, was he a caretaker?
Sorry,
what was his end game? And then before going to McMullen and Jersey.
Well, Peter Gilbert was again, because I remember asking him the question, and I've seen the response since, asking the question, well, how can you succeed if nobody else can in Denver? There has been able to, because I'm me and I can get it done. There's always that abiding faith in entrepreneurs and millionaires that they can get it done, even when it's involved in areas with which they have not been familiar. And there's that certain arrogance that's involved. And Gilbert really thought he was going to. It was similar to the story with the Imperator being a Rangers fan. He was a Buffalo Sabres fan, lived in Buffalo. He really thought he would be the man to get the franchise turned around. And he initially did really think of buying the Nuggets too, becoming kind of the sports czar, like Stan Kroenke now of Denver, and realized, he was wealthy, but he was writing. I rode with him on his private plane to Winnipeg one time, both for a story and become more familiar with him. And I really liked his wife, and it was I actually enjoyed talking to him. There were some things in his past being involved in Israel and everything else that I found fascinating and enjoyable to write about, and at least talk to him about. And he was just a very fascinating guy. But he, again, at the time, he just wasn't of the deep-pocketed sort. He had taken basically a bankrupt cable operation and was in the right place at the right time when the burgeoning cable market made that a license to print money, and that's how he became wealthy. But he was not that wealthy. It was just a simple case of him being in that era when the thought was you could be a mid-range wealthy person and be a sports owner, and we all know that that's just not possible anymore.
And how do you think Imperatori took the eventual move to New Jersey when McMullen bought the team? Was he sort of vindicated? Was he behind the scenes maybe a bit collusionary? Was he proven right, so to speak? Did he not care? I just wondered how he might have felt the fact that he kind of had New Jersey in the corner of his eye years before and didn't get to sort of see it happen.
Well, it was kind of funny because I remember the date, and I remember because of the setting. I was covering the NHL Finals, and the Devils were in it. And I had lunch at the Waterway Pier there in Weehawken.
Sure, his ferry. That was his
yeah.
After the fact, yeah.
I had lunch with him and Armin Pohan there, and I basically posed that question about the team did get to New Jersey, and does that bring any? And he said no, because the thing I found out was it's a lot more fun to be a hockey fan than a hockey owner. And and I kind of laughed, but he really meant that. I think he he realized I don't think he had any angst about not being the owner of the franchise when it came to New Jersey. He was just kind of thinking naively and wide-eyed in the process before that.
That's interesting. That is very interesting, especially as a New Jersey born and bred resident myself. That's and knowing what I thought I knew about sort of the franchise, how it came to be and stuff. All right, I got two last questions for you then, and you've been a saint to stick with my my incessant questioning. One more trivia based, and one sort of more legacy oriented. Let me start with the trivia one first. There is that
Del Crandall.
What's it? No,
I always answer every trivia question.
No, you need to buzz in first, please. No. The
who is Del Crandall?
The urban legend is that the Rock and Roll Part 1 song by Gary Glitter got its start as a sports anthem with the Rockies. True or false?
True.
To your knowledge.
It depends on what your definition of terms are, but Kevin O'Brien had been hired to be the new PR director for that second season. And he had been I might be wrong on this. I'm going to take a shot, and I think this is right, with Muskegon in the International Hockey League. And he had used Rock and Roll Part 2. He'd gone through his old 45s to look for an anthem for goal scoring there and used it there. So it did not start in pro sports with the Rockies. It started there in the International Hockey League, and Kevin was hired by the Rockies and brought it with him. And that was before Gary Glitter's infamous apprehension and prosecution for pretty despicable things. And so, but it was the Rockies that got it started in professional sports.
Very interesting. And I'm wondering too if that's certainly Gary Glitter thing. Very it became a rock anthem at sports. It was almost synonymous, especially through I guess the 90s.
Yeah, even college bands. I mean, you still hear college bands playing at football games.
Yeah, and I guess before we sort of get off the trivia thing too, I distinctly remember a few photos of Crazy George Henderson banging his drum. Do you remember that too? We've had him on the.
Yeah,
he's great.
I'm sorry. Crazy George had been involved with, I think, the Golden Seals. Does that sound right?
Sure. He was a Bay Area fixture for sure, but then he kind of made his way around various teams for hire, so to speak, over the Rockies. Yeah.
Yeah, he came all over, and he was very prominent with the Rockies. He did some commercials for them, and he was a visible element in their marketing, no question.
All right, here's the last question, and this goes down to legacy. Now, this is just this silly little exploit. The show that we do is, we're always interested and intrigued by sort of like where team history kind of lives on, right? And for a franchise like the former Rockies, right? There are arguably a number of different places where this 6-year, time capsule might legitimately live. Now, certainly the NHL would say, well, of course it's the with the Devils, right? Because that's where the lineage goes, and same for the Scouts that preceded them. But I would imagine Denver hockey fans would say, well, the spirit of NHL hockey for sure should stick with the Avs when they came into town in the 90s. But some would maybe argue that, this is just a period of time. And it was sort of in its own little sort of shrink wrap bubble and maybe doesn't really live anywhere. What do you think, having covered the team for most of its life, where do you think, any of those logos and the memories and any of the throwbacks and any of that kind of stuff might live should anyone care? We do, for what it's worth.
Where I will get on the NHL is a refusal to set a uniform policy for the way franchises treat their history. And, that's arguable that maybe that decision should be up to the teams themselves. But if you look at the Devils media guide and the Devils website and anything else tied to the franchise itself, it's as if the franchise started when they moved to New Jersey. There are no references to the Rockies that I know of. There are no references to the Kansas City Scouts. It's just that the Devils were a new team and started, and that was the start of the franchise. And so you're talking everything from individual player records to team accomplishments. The Rockies and the Scouts don't exist, which sort of offends me. And the interesting contrast is the way the Colorado Avalanche treats the Quebec Nordiques. They treat them, as you look through the media guide and retired numbers and everything else. I could be wrong on that, but they treat the Quebec Nordiques as part of the honored part of their heritage, and they're even having the throwback jerseys for them this year. And you go back through the storied history of the Nordiques with Peter Stastny and a lot of other great players, and even the great players that played for the Nordiques. They honor that part of their heritage. And I really believe that there should be some kind of uniform policy for that. So here in Denver, it's kind of an interesting argument between there is a hardcore that really does either firsthand remember the Rockies or cared enough to try to research them and learn about them. And the Rockies are kind of part of that overall hockey heritage and history in Colorado that very few acknowledge. When Colorado had all the minor league teams over the years, the WHA, the prominent program at the University of Denver and Colorado College. And so to say that the hockey began when the Avalanche moved here or even when the Rockies moved here is just flat out incorrect. It's all part of the hockey heritage. And to those people, that'll be the Rockies. That's always going to be the Rockies. And the Rockies should be the throwback jerseys. The Devils don't even acknowledge that the Rockies exist. So it's kind of an interesting argument and debate that's ongoing. And I would say that there's a little bit of both camps involved here, that the team very much acknowledges its Quebec Nordiques history, and the fans very much acknowledge the Colorado Rockies roots.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I wonder, especially given how big business and truly big business sports has become, especially when it comes to merchandise and logos and all that stuff, right? We've seen it with the Hartford Whalers and the Carolina Hurricanes, right? Who've just all.
Oh, there you've done it. Now I'm going to hear brass bonanza for the.
Well, yeah, tonight. Sure, okay. Well, we've had the Whaler guys on a previous episode, hoping that someday Hartford will get their team back. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but it's also interesting to see how convenient the last couple of years with the new Hurricanes ownership about how warmly embracing they are of the heritage and the logo and the merchandising of Hartford in that mixture, when for years it was, to your point, almost New Jersey Devils-esque in its understanding or a belief that there was anything prior to, right? So wherever there's money, there's trouble, right? And you wonder, this is out there. It's got some value. You wonder what NHL. We'll see, right? Interesting for you.
In this time, in this process, it's kind of hard to chart things. But the last I knew, they were selling Colorado Rockies jerseys in the Pepsi Center. Now it's the Ball Arena gift shop, and so they were taking advantage of the Rockies heritage there. But their throwback jerseys are going to be involved, or are going to be homage to the Nordiques this year. And so I think the team and the Kroenke Sports Enterprises leadership is kind of wants to have it both ways there, but I at least acknowledge that they give the fans a choice. If they want to buy a Rockies jersey and wear Barry Beck or a Wolf Paymont personalized jersey to the game, so they can do that. And you see that every once in a while, and it is kind of fun.
All righty now. Thanks to Terry. Fantastic conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm just finally happy to get into a story of the Colorado Rockies, one that has been on our ever-growing list to finally tackle, and we appreciate the excuse for doing so with Terry. And let's promote some good stuff from Terry. Lord knows he's got a ton of writings out there for you to delve into and enjoy, like we have started to do so ourselves. The book that this story came from, and many other great Denver sports memories, is Playing Piano in a Brothel. That book is available. It's basically his journeys as a sports writer in Denver. And this is but one of many, many stories to enjoy. How about 77? Denver, the Broncos, and the coming of age. They break out season of the NFL Broncos. Great book. We highly recommend Third Down and a War to Go. a tremendous memoir and story, frankly, of Terry's father as a player on the wartime University of Wisconsin football team and all of his teammates. A fantastic story, and hopefully perhaps a screenplay to come at a theater near you someday. How about Horns, Hogs, and Nixon coming? Yeah, it's a story of Texas and Arkansas in college football in what Terry describes as Dixie's Last Stand. That's a very intriguing book. Some novels, some historically accurate novels that Terry has written too. The Witch's Season being one of them. Olympic Affair, which is sort of a Nazi-tinged World War II historical novel that has a ton of Olympics and other sports intrigue tied into it too. And back into the realm of nonfiction, March 1939, what is subtitled as Before the Madness, which essentially is the story of the real first Final Four of the NCAA basketball tournament, back when the University of Oregon won the whole thing for the proverbial first time. All those and more can be found on Terry's website, again, at terryfrei.com, TerryFrei, terryfrei.com. And you can follow Terry on Twitter at tfrei, at TFREI, at tfrei. Let's see. You can follow us on Twitter. Why don't you do that too? If you're subscribing to various follows there, we're at Good Seats Still. You'll find us also, by the way, on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. And you'll find us on Facebook too. There's a little page devoted to us there. I can't remember any of that. We'll just go to our website, for God's sakes, and bookmark that. And that's goodseatsstillavailable.com. Watch your spelling. It's goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's where you'll find all of our previous episodes and all the ones to come. If you somehow have missed them or forgot to subscribe to us in your podcast feed, why not enjoy and stream all those things? All the books, not only of Terry's this week, but all the books in various media forms that various guests might have brought with them related to our conversations can be found and purchased through links on the website. And of course, we'll get a little shekel or two of love from Amazon or whatever the sellers might be. We appreciate that, and you're doing so in that manner. If you want to send us some email, we're always welcome to hear your comments and suggestions. That's the address, of course, is hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. Almost forgot that address. Can't believe that. You want to subscribe to our weekly newsletter, you can do that too. Just find the clickable link on our website and just give us your name and email address, and we'll sign you up for a little weekly blast of goodness, giving you a hint about what's going to be on the next week's episode. And by all means, please not only subscribe early and often to the show for your various ongoing listening pleasure, but by all means, please rate and review the show. We appreciate that, and that helps other people like you find the show, discover the show, be recommended to listen to the show. We can always benefit from some further listenership. We always love having new people find the show and discover, going down our rabbit hole of previous episodes. And we've got so many more things planned for you. We just love to keep growing that base of fans as people like you have done. We appreciate that to no end. And let's see, how about giving a tip of thanks, of course, as always, to our great pal, Jerry Payne, down in Atlanta. Thank you, kind sir, for your editorial goodness and twiddling of the knobs this week. We could not do this show without you, that is for sure. Let's see, what else? I don't think there's anything else. There will be, hopefully, another show next week. That's what else. So wish us luck in that endeavor, and we wish you good luck in hanging there for yet another week. And Lord knows it's ever challenging out there, but hopefully we kind of distracted you for a bit this week, and we look forward to doing it again next week. And let's leave you with some music, shall we? Of course, we always try to do that when we can, and I can't think of a better tune to send us out than the song that became the signature song for every goal and every victory scored and achieved by the Colorado Rockies. Here it is. It's Gary Glitter. It's Rock and Roll, Part 1. Thanks for listening, everybody. Take care. See you next week.